My name is Nina Khrushcheva. I'm of Milano School of International Affairs, Management and Urban Policy. I'm also curator of the exhibit that some of you already checked out, and some of you will hopefully come and check out after our event here. I'm sorry to spend some time on this, but it's very important, so I would like to recognize a few people that are very important for this exhibition. First is Radhika Subramaniam. Is it correct? Okay, thank you. And I'm very aware of my mistakes because my name is often mangled, so I apologize if I did something wrong. She's the director of these wonderful galleries, and it was originally her idea to invite me and my colleague Sergeant to actually do the exhibit, so very grateful. Christina Kaufman, then also Yicheng Wang, who is not here and who is the most remarkable research assistant I've ever had. Joachim Heckel, who is responsible for designing and helping with the design of this exhibition, Joshua Waihon Lam, and all these people worked closely on the show. There are a lot of other people we recognize, but there's all there hanging there on the wall, so you can check it out. India-China Institute that helped us, and remarkably, once we start talking about strong power, we just cannot stop. So on the 26th, the India-China Institute has its own event on strong power, which is quite great coincidence because we didn't plan it this way. Then another person that is very important here is the artist Brenda Bogart, who came here to the exhibition. And when you see that she contributed, I mean, it was special loan to us, the beautiful painting, Dictators and Other Dicks, which we did not know existed, and suddenly we do, and suddenly once again, I mean, all these dictatorial forms are merging together. New School Arts Collection, which also became part of the show. So this is all very important. I see students from my propaganda class. Thank you all. It has been a long time in the making. So because I've been obsessed with true power since Dick Cheney became vice president in 2000, and so that basically now this is one of the results. I want to thank my collaborator who's going to speak later about the architecture of this exhibit, Sergeant Jovanovic Weiss. And he and his team designed this beautiful show, and of course Bobby Ghosh, who is a managing editor of Quartz magazine and contributed to CNN. And when he checked out the exhibition, he said, "Oh, I'm so glad I see a lot of," because he formerly was global editor of Time magazine, and he said, "I see a lot of my magazine pictures, and some of the stories are mine." So once again, we're sort of converging in the dictatorial or true power conversation today. So just a few words about the exhibition. I know that some of you have looked at it. Romancing True Power, it does investigate power, which is authoritarian, autocratic, dictatorial. We are not lumping them together, but we do talk about them loosely, and sometimes they interchange. And one of the interest is that, of course, we always think about, especially in America, we think this power belongs to these other countries, but you know, in America we're all great. But what we try to show, the democracies are not immune. So a lot of it is a conversation about strong leadership and you know, those who make unilateral decisions, either in democracies or non-democracies. And we do love them for that. It's a lot of there's a lot of seduction in having resolve and organization and vision. You know, leading in difficult times. This is sort of the usual words that are being used. When you walk into this auditorium, you saw the live picture, we call it family photo, of our D20. This is modeled on G20, the group of industrialized nations, but it's D20, Dick20, D-I-C-K. Because in some ways, these are the people, in our view, represent the idea of strong power, and we call it Dick power. Don't be shy. It's a perfectly acceptable word. Other than we were ordering M&Ms with images of that, we were told that this is a family-driven, family values-driven company, so we cannot order M&M with the word Dick on it. And we kept saying, well, but what if it's a name? And they said, well, it doesn't matter. So unfortunately, there would be no M&Ms with Dick on it, but there are other words we try to use and play with it. So what we're looking at, and Sergeant will talk about it much better, so we look at dictatorial typology, what unites them, what are commonalities, what are the constructs, what are the definitions, and Yiching and I put together, with others' contribution, we put together a journal called Romancing True Power, D20. We were going to give it out, but we actually ran out of copies before it even started, but it is available online, and we strongly encourage you to look at it. So one last thing I want to say, so when Sergey and I were talking about this with Radhika originally in the conversation, we sort of shared a lot of fascination with how, in some ways, there's a growing realization that democracies or the promise of democracy doesn't always bring the results that people expect to have. I mean, the Arab Spring in 2010 rolled over the Middle East and Africa, and now we have El-Sisi, who replaced Hosni Mubarak of that, and we have Gaddafi, who was taken out in Libya, and these countries are not closer to democracy than they ever were. So the idea that we had is that people don't want to be oppressed, but when they have a choice between the disorder and the strong hand, they may actually choose the strong hand, so it does win. But another thing that we were thinking about or considering is that very trite Aristotelian quote that then Winston Churchill used, that all powers are horrible except for, democracy is a horrible form of governance except for all other ones. And it is indeed true, and I think that I'm going to give word to Sergeant because, as you notice, the exhibition is made of paper. And it is indeed true that, Dick Cheney, for example, was there for 8 years and then he's gone. But Vladimir Putin has been sitting there for 15 years, and we all know what the results of that is. But in other architectural terms, Cheney's palace on the wall, because and Sergeant will talk about that idea, on the wall, it's an undisclosed location because ultimately it's really frowned upon in democracies to have great, grandiose palaces. But Recep Erdogan of Turkey, the president of Turkey, has the most insane construction of this on his head. And I would like to remind you it cost over 600 million. And that man was actually democratically elected. So just sort of for comparison, that ultimately democracies win. So on that note, I would like to turn it to Sergeant and then to Bobby.
Okay, good. Because there is a video. Hi, my name is Sergeant Ivanovic Weiss. Really happy to be here. And also to do this experiment between international affairs and architecture. In fact, my thesis would be that this is actually not an experiment because architecture and power were always together. And we know that since the antique times. But to give just a few notes about the installation and the team, which Nina has already commended, is that really the idea was not really to show the power from the side of the person in power, but from somebody who is at home anywhere, in a village, in a house, who can print out anything. In fact, maybe admire those leaders, but somehow have this sort of like a way of making their own space. So in that sense, this is basically the major idea behind the design. I also, as you can see, there are a couple of elements of the show. One is the big wallpaper with the life-sized leaders where people already make selfies. We see them on the internet already. And then there is a video of the parades of humans getting into shapes of geometry. There is a big table in the gallery. We call it a table, but it's actually the idea of the table, which is a timeline of 20 dictators that we picked. And then there is a shelf of a book, which is again also the idea of a shelf, because it cannot really hold a book. So, and of course there is a pick your own dick sort of voting poll, which is being used. I would like to, so this is more or less, and you will see it, I don't have to show it, but I would like to do something very important, because the team was really amazing. And they produced this 1-minute video of their construction. This is really to the team. It really is fantastic how everybody internalized the project. Of course, the music was Rimsky-Korsakov, and the Flight of the Bumblebee. And the last thing, just about the design, why some lights are not working in the main gallery. It's also deliberate, so 2 lights are working, because many times in dictatorial systems, electricity is actually turned off. And so that was also the idea on how to actually have an idea that it works, but then in fact sometimes it doesn't work. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So the way we're going to do it, I'm going to ask Bobby some questions, that being international affairs and Milano School, and then we have to be out of here at about 5 minutes, for sharp 5 minutes to 7, and then we can actually move to the gallery and to the reception and have more conversation. We have all the time in the world until 8 o'clock. So I'm going to ask Bobby some questions, and he will answer. And if we have time for Q&A, then we can go there. Okay, so my first question for you is, we have our D20 and right there on the wall. Who is your D5 or D10, and why?
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thanks everyone for coming. This is a subject that Nina and I have spoken about quite a lot in green rooms, waiting for our turn to go on TV at various places. And
about Putin mostly.
Mostly to talk about Putin, but also to entertain each other. But it's a subject I've been very sort of aware of and very fascinated by in recent years. I mean, dictators have always been with us, and I suspect will be with us for a very long time to come. There are, at this moment in time, you know, depending on how you define it, several dozen of them in the world. My interest is greatest with the group that I would call the new authoritarians. These are leaders who have learned to use the democratic system to their advantage. These are elected dictators, as contradictory as that expression might sound. You mentioned Sisi earlier. Sisi, for me, is a throwback. He's a reflection of an old form of dictatorship, where you hold, as Mubarak did, you hold sham elections in which you pretty much ensure you're the only party that can win. But there are a number of very authoritarian-like leaders in the world now who routinely hold in their countries elections that we can generally agree are free and fair-ish, and in some cases are very free and very fair. And so if I'm going to pick 5 starting from the Far East and heading west, I'd start with Shinzo Abe of Japan, Narendra Modi of India, the newest member of this club, Vladimir Putin, probably the most powerful and most the best known of the lot, Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey, who has become progressively more and more authoritarian even in the last 2 or 3 years, since I interviewed him about 3 years ago. And finally, Paul Kagame of Rwanda, these are very different. Each of them has sort of some very unique and specific features that we could go into at length if you like. But what they do have in common is that they are popularly elected in fairly free elections. Their popularity seems to be in direct proportion to their exercise of authoritarianism. It would appear the more authoritarian they get, the more votes they get, which is puzzling. They come from countries that are in different stages of democracy. Russia is a fairly new democracy. Japan is not. India is not. Rwanda came out of an enormous, deeply traumatic experience with the genocide, and Kagame's success in some ways is tied to that, because he represents a chance to break away from that tragedy and sort of excise it from the national consciousness. But India is not recovering from any great trauma. Certainly Turkey is not. So they have sort of interesting characteristics, but they're all essentially democratic. And it fascinates me that they have been able to use the system in this manner. And it's fascinating and troubling that the citizens of those countries seem to respond to the increasing authoritarianism with greater endorsement. Erdogan just won an election that, if you simply looked at the facts of the ground over the last couple of years, he should not have won, certainly not so handily, and yet he did. Modi's election runs contrary to India's political history, which has been essentially, by and large, liberal progressive, whereas he is very much a climate change denying religious fundamentalist, possibly with blood on his hands. Japan, Abe again has won re-election quite handily, despite the fact that the initial economic promise of his first term now seems to be whittled away a little bit, and he's having difficulty delivering on some of the promises he did, and yet his people still continue to vote for him. So these five are, for me, the sort of most interesting. There's Rafael Correa in Ecuador, there's Viktor Orban in Europe, but these are the five that I find most interesting.
Great, well, thank you. That actually leads me to another question that I have. So it seems to me what you're saying, that the world to some degree is turning more authoritarian. So the firm hand is the thing to go with. So the decisive rulers are in vogue. So my question is, why is that? Why is the world turning radical, reactionary, but basically conservative on either side? Some would say that it is the result of U.S. own autocracy, when Dick Cheney, Dick Cheney is very important to me, when his war on terror in the 2000s may be the reason for that.
I wouldn't go quite that far. I think each of them comes to power in slightly different circumstances. There is a larger narrative, which is it would seem that progressive liberalism, or liberal progressivism, however you want to define it, does not seem to answer all the aspirations of all people. In preparing for this discussion, I was trying to understand what all these five people have in common and what those countries have in common. And it's really hard to find, it's hard to put Japan and Rwanda in the same basket, because these are countries in very different stages of economic development and very different stages of political experience. But there are some things that seem to sort of, in a slightly fuzzy way, suggest a pattern. Growing wealth, a large middle class, not necessarily true of Japan, but in many of these other countries, that you have sort of a new middle class that is expressing itself politically. And it would appear that this new middle class is reflexively conservative. And although enjoys, the middle class enjoy many of the fruits of modern economy, liberal economy and liberal thought, when it comes to how they want their own country to be run, they're quite conservative, almost reactionary in their attitude. And you certainly see that a lot in Russia. As you know, you see that a lot in India. And this is confusing because you assume, I think, almost automatically that when people have more money, it opens their minds. But apparently, it does not. The other contradiction is that in all of these societies, you have far greater information. People are much more aware now, thanks to sort of robust, in some cases quite rambunctious media in countries like India and Japan, and also the internet. And so people are far more aware of what's going on in their own country. They're far more aware of their country's place in the world. And again, this seems a contradiction. Greater awareness does not seem to create a greater sort of liberal aspiration. On the contrary, it seems to make people want to retreat a little bit into some certainties. And what Putin and Abe and Modi and all these others are offering is that certainty, that in these difficult times, when social mores seem to be changing around you, when the world is a frightening and confusing place, and you're more frightened and more confused because you know more about it, we, as these very powerful patriarchal figures, are offering you a rock on which to rest. That's my best guess of why these very disparate societies are all showing a sort of similar pattern.
But that's exactly what, you know, if I were, I couldn't put it that eloquently, but if I could, that's exactly what I would have said, because middle class wants to protect itself, and these people promise the protection, and hence another word that we use in our exhibition is romancing, because we do insist that people do love that power. It's fascinating. It's either for protection or because we like the bad boys of politics, and that's another thing that unites nations in certain ways. So may I ask you, we try to define true power. All the definitions are on the walls. You are hopefully go and read them, because we worked very hard on them. In fact, Surgeon and I fought quite badly over the quotes and definitions, not the ones that we're putting, because that was, I mean, their responsibility was design. Our responsibility was to sort of conceptualize that in terms of, in political terms, not that the design team did not participate in that, but we sort of worked on it together. But I wanted my quotes framed. I want them to be important. I want them to be solid. And surgeons said, no, they need to be printed anywhere. They need to be fluid, because we're not really offering final solution. And I have to say, finally, I was convinced, because we are not offering. That's why we have this POYD, pick your own dick, as in bring your own bottle. So I hope you will go and vote, because, you know, Bobby's list is different from mine, and Surgeon's list is different from somebody else's, and somebody wants turkey in it, and somebody doesn't. And so it's for the conversation that we need to have this discussion. So my question to you, how would you define true power?
Wow.
You're on the spot, right?
I gave you questions in advance.
Well, I think true power is the ability to persuade people that it is in their interest to give up so many of their freedoms, that that authoritarianism with a small a is actually good for their societies. That is really remarkable for me. I mean, having grown up in India, I was raised by my liberal progressive parents to believe that India was best run by, I wouldn't say weak leaders, but that the nature of India, that Indian society, the diversity of the country, the religious and ethnic complexity of it, that one strong individual should not be allowed to run a country like that. That it is best run by consensus, and that means a number of, shall we say, medium-sized leaders rather than one giant. And that Nehru was an exception. We're very fortunate that he was not megalomaniacal in the way that some of these others are. But that was a one-off, and let's not sort of hope for another miracle like that. Let's sort of divide power among many leaders and force them to bring some kind of consensus. That's what I was raised to believe. And to think that the same India now gives almost untrammeled power to a single man really makes my head spin. I struggle to understand why they did that.
I just want to have a sub-question.
Yeah.
To you, because with your experience and incredible knowledge, like, do you think the true power can it be divided? Is it between territory or between space, between common space? Because what we show in the show is also parades and, you know, the showing of power and collectiveness. I'm curious, what do you think?
Well, yeah,
is it really a territorial thing still, or is it more like?
Well, firstly, it is mental. You know, I was just going to finish the thought. I was that Modi's great power is that he persuaded the Indian people that everything they thought about themselves and their political reality was wrong, and that they should actually go against that grain and give him power. And so the first expression of power is the ability to change people's thinking.
Change mind.
And to persuade them, in my opinion, to go against their best interest. Now, the parades, the demonstrations, the great rallies, these are outward demonstrations of power. But in a country like India, they're almost, people dismiss them because they're seen almost like a circus. So that's not enough. I mean, anybody can pull together a parade. You can rent a crowd and have people chant your name. You can buy television advertising and have your face in people's faces all the time. You can build statues to yourself. But that seems almost old-fashioned. The new expression of power is here when on your Twitter stream and on your Facebook page you see your friends and people you've known forever doing a sort of 90-degree turn and sort of abandoning all the political certainties of the past and embracing this new idea. That is much more powerful to me. That is much more, in some ways, frightening to me than a parade of tanks.
Okay, but I mean, that's also a really great point, because then what I'm hearing that you're saying is that the true power is in the hands of everybody today, rather than selected authoritarians.
Yeah, but those authoritarians are able to persuade people to give it up, to say, okay, you have the power because of the vote, you have the power because of your access to information, now give it to me, because I'm the best keeper of the flame.
But also, the power isn't here, and yet Erdogan just built his palace. So in some ways, the traditional formulas have not been dismissed. I mean, they continue to, once you get there, then you actually want to have that. And one of the examples, I mean, Modi is not part of our conversation here. I mean, it is part of our conversation, but I mean, not one of our decks. We haven't gotten that far, but we all know that when he was meeting with Barack Obama, I think in January, he had his suit with his name embroidered all over. What it is not as the traditional display of my own greatness. So I think that in some ways it remains.
Yeah, I mean, Erdogan's interesting. I think Erdogan is beginning to slip back in time and going
kind
from
of like
being
Putin.
He's sort of farther down, I think, because of these sort of outward displays. I mean, this palace is so retro. It's the sort of thing you would have, both literally as well as metaphorically. I mean, if you saw the photograph when I think it was the Prime Minister of Iraq came to visit, he greeted him in the palace as a sweeping staircase,
Yes.
and along the sides were these knights from Ottoman history, dressed fully, sort of in full regalia. This is the sort of thing you would have expected from Gaddafi in the old days. This is very different. Putin, amasses cronies, amasses power, but he's not building statues, at least not yet.
He built a church.
So,
if you come to my office, I have Putin's rugs and Putin's clocks and.
But that's part of the hoopla of democracy. You can get a rug of almost.
Yeah, but
you can buy Barack Obama on a mug. But that's.
You could, but those rugs actually are being requested as official gifts. So they're not that far. Probably Russia is not that far into Asia yet, and so their display of power is slightly, Putin thinks it's slightly more European. But enough about Putin.
What's also interesting that to your point about displays of parades and so on is, again, these guys use, by and large, they use people power, not the military power. They didn't come to power by coup, and therefore they don't owe the military anything, Sisi being the exception, which is why he's a throwback. They don't really need the military in that sense. The Erdogan, if anything, does not get along with his military. The military doesn't trust him, and he doesn't trust them, even though he has replaced a lot of the old so-called secular generals with people who are closer to his line of thinking. The Indian military is not a serious player politically, but even in his political discourse, Modi does not feel it necessary to tip his hat towards the military. Kagame doesn't either. So that, this is new.
Right.
And that's what makes them fascinating.
So to follow up on space and geography, I think it's a very important question. Donald Rumsfeld, who was Dick Cheney's friend, he very memorably talked about the new Europe and the old Europe, and of course the new Europe was going to follow the American values or traditional Western values versus the old Europe that cannot appreciate wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it seems to me that actually today that is slightly being thrown off its head, because we see one of the European leaders of Hungary, Viktor Orban, he is now almost officially recognized as the new Nazi, which I hate this comparison, but there have been a lot of articles written about this, how he's a strong man, and I think Putin, in fact, just met with him, and they were talking about strength and power and whatnot. So was Donald Rumsfeld wrong? Is it something, because one of the questions that we ask is this a personality issue to be a dick, or is it a geography, is it a climate, because some continents seem to have more, is it a culture issue? Some seem to have more dicks than others. So is Europe or Eastern Europe reverting to the tradition?
Well, I should hope not. I mean, hopefully for every Hungary you have a Poland, and that sort of brings about a certain balance. Orban is a relatively new phenomenon, and we'll see how far he can get. He reminds me actually much more of Rafael Correa in Ecuador. They have sort of very similar, almost sort of even in affect they're very similar. Hungary, I think he gets away because Hungary is no longer as pivotal as it was during the Cold War. and so he gets almost a free pass. But the growing anti-Semitism in Hungary is extremely alarming, and at the very least, he's not doing anything about it, and that is something I think that will bring him more and more into the forefront, and I suspect we'll begin to hear. He also is fortunate that there are greater, graver crises around him. Right. If we want also exercise with Ukraine right now, I just remember as the international editor of Time, before the Ukrainian crisis exploded, we'd done a story on Hungary. We were planning more coverage around the anti-Semitism, and particularly the departure of many Hungarian Jews who were fleeing and either going to Israel or other parts of Europe. It was something that was on my radar. And then, of course, Ukraine happened and blew everything off. So he's a beneficiary of this instability. Yeah. Okay. But I don't think... I'm not sure that there is a case to be made that all of Eastern Europe can be colored with the same brush like that. I think the differences are much more interesting than what they have the similarities.
Okay. No.
My question to that is that could you speculate who would be emerging dictators within Eastern Europe?
Oh boy.
Or anywhere.
Or anywhere.
Because that's one of the questions. What is your next 10-year
exactly
prediction?
Well, all of these guys seem to want to be around for a very long time. None of them seems to have any desire to give up power anytime soon. And given the sheer diversity of these countries that we're talking about, the lesson to be drawn is that this kind of authoritarianism can pop up almost anywhere. Right. If it can happen in Japan and in India, two very, very different countries, then it can happen almost anywhere. We'd like to think that sort of Western Europe is immune to this sort of thing, but then Silvio Berlusconi, you have to explain him. He didn't get away with it, and I think that is there's something unique about the chaos of Italian politics that we should give some credit to. But he did come close, and so yeah, it can happen almost anywhere.
And actually, Silvio Berlusconi, because he's one of our dicks, and Bobby and I were talking about it. It's like, oh, well, maybe he comes close, but he's not really. And it was another interesting thing about this working on this exhibition. It's a lot of disagreement of who qualifies and who doesn't, because it's a very personal choice in some ways. For example, I have Juan Perón of Argentina, and I realized that one of the reasons I have him is because I'm so obsessed with Evita. But there are really other Argentinian leaders that probably would qualify more. I'm still standing by my choice, but
Well, Cristina right now.
Right, Cristina is very Evitish-like. Actually, that brings me to my last question, and then hopefully we'll have maybe at least a bit time for questions for you, is that we talk about dick power. We have one woman in the exhibition because we really don't want to discriminate, but such was the world that they were mostly men. We have Margaret Thatcher. We are not comparing. As I said, there's no direct comparison, but there is type of leadership that she exercised was quite dictatorial, and she had iron balls, which is, of course, one has to recognize. And Bobby and I, when we were talking about her, he said, well, but you don't have Indira Gandhi. How could you not? And so I would like you to elaborate on that. Is that, why Indira Gandhi actually is a dick-type leader, and, speak a little bit about other female political dicks.
Well, Indira Gandhi enjoys a greater reputation, I think, outside the country than she does in the country, because she was such a striking figure. The time that she came onto the international stage, there were very few women there. And she had certain sort of admirable qualities. She was very self-assured. She gave good speech, and of course she was Nehru's daughter, which also helped. But students of Indian political history will recognize that she was the one who tried to put a halt to India's democratic experiment by ordering a state of national emergency for 2 years in the late 70s. And then got carried away. She thought that the public would be so grateful that she took away their powers that when she gave the vote back to them, they would vote overwhelmingly in her favor. The Indian public thought otherwise, which is a useful lesson for Narendra Modi. But she was the one, in my opinion, to whom we can sort of draw straight lines from many of the things that ail Indian politics today. She was exceptionally paranoid. She did not trust anybody around her. She actively sought out and got away from the Congress party anybody who, even in the most distant way, she perceived as a threat. She surrounded herself with sycophants. She was, or at the very least, allowed, even encouraged, sort of very profound levels of corruption, and then that process, once it was set in motion, has not been sort of set back. The Congress party never quite recovered from that, and Indian politics has not recovered from that. And supporters of the BJP would be horrified to hear me suggest this, but Narendra Modi is much more like Indira Gandhi than any other Indian figure in history. He too believes in centralizing power. He does not trust strong figures around him. He prefers sycophants to genuine political contenders. And basically, judging by what we've learnt of the 8-9 months that he's been in charge, he wants to run the country in almost a presidential vein. That is very Indira Gandhi-like in its sort of execution. He's just executed it more efficiently than she ever did. But yeah, for Indians of my generation, Indira Gandhi was the root of many of the evils of India's democracy today.
Any other women except for, you mentioned?
Well, you have the two sort of white widows in Bangladesh, both Khaleda Zia and Sheikh Hasina are incredibly. They're cut from the same cloth as Indira Gandhi. In some ways, that you can see how they're very influenced by her style of governing. Christina Kirchner, as we've said, is now on. It seems like she's going over the edge, basically, and is channeling your favorite Evita in some regard. Those are the ones that spring immediately to mind.
Okay, so we have 10 more minutes. Do we have 10 more minutes for questions? Maybe 5. So quickly, if you can quickly ask a question, please.
Western notions of democracy emerged out of the Reformation and Western notions of individualism. That's not true for Central Europe, Eastern Europe, or Asia. It seems to me that you're applying Western notions of individualism, democracy, to Asian situations or Central European situations where it doesn't apply.
I would challenge that. I don't think democracy is uniquely a Western construct. It may have started in the West, but it's not rocket science. Anybody from any culture can understand the fundamentals of democracy, and until this recent trend, it would seem that it is what people want everywhere. Whether they have necessarily all the tools to sort of produce a fully formed, perfectly executed democracy, that varies from country to country. But I don't think that this is I think like, loving your children and respecting your elders, there is something universal about the idea of people power. And there are many examples, even in Asia, of societies wanting that kind of power. I mean, Indonesia is a country that's going in the opposite direction, went from strongmen like Suharto to now a far more open, a far more democratic process. And Indonesia is the heart of Asia, if you like. So I'm not sure that there is any one culture that is inimical to democracy, that is not suited for democracy. Certainly not in this day and age.
This is for Bobby Ghosh again. This is Prabhakaran, an alumnus of the New School. I also grew up in India, so our experience, the background may be similar, though opinions may be different. I have problem with your bracketing Modi with Putin. Modi was elected, of course, he belonged to a Hindu fundamentalist party, but he was elected through the most democratic way, one of the most democratic elections in the world. And his party, I also have problem with the Hindu fundamentalist party, though I was raised as a Hindu. But after the election, has he shown any democratic, dictatorial tendencies? First question. Second part is, you also brought up Nehru's name. Nehru was a paragon of liberal democratic virtues and all that. He wanted to rule by consensus, but not a single leader said no to what Nehru decided. So he did not have to rule by consensus. And his daughter, most democratically elected, became the most dictatorial woman. So that there you and I agree. But this Modi, I will give him the benefit of the doubt, because so far, has he shown any dictatorial tendencies?
Well, yes, he has basically, and these are small alarms, not major ones. I think he recognizes that ruling from the center is very different from running one state in India. And you have to give him credit for recognizing that. But he rules from the Prime Minister's office. No minister, uniquely, I mean, even much more than under any number of Gandhis, he has essentially completely undermined all the ministries. Every decision of any consequence is made from the Prime Minister's office. That is a fairly dictatorial tendency. And in terms of what he's allowing people to do around him, allowing his party to browbeat minorities, this business of converting forcibly people back, as they like to say, into Hinduism. These are very worrying signs. Now, it is a large country, and large parts of it seem to be doing fine. But I'm skeptical because of the sense that he tolerates no opinion other than his own.
Well, we actually, sorry, we have, no, sir.
Why don't we continue to talk?
Yes, you'll continue later, because we have time for one more question, and then I'm going to announce so far the results of POYD.
Okay, speaking of dicks, I think I'm going to ask what I think might be an elephant in the room question here, which is obviously the sexual connotation here, that a dick can be a pejorative term to call somebody, you're a dick, but obviously there's a anatomical element here. And, so what is it about the sex lives, let's say, of a dictator? In this country, presidents have to be careful because they could get impeached, for certain things. But, is there anything that can be learned from that? And is there also a Freudian phallic aspect here, the worshiping of the great man, the great big, phallic guy? And then the other element, the erotic part, is, do people have better sex in dictatorships or democracies? I don't know. Just some questions.
I'm going to leave that to you.
Yes, and I am happy to answer this question.
That's great.
To the first part of your question, as Mikhail Gorbachev used to say, in your question there is an answer. So yes, indeed. But it is much a power. It is the power that thinks that it can sort of rule the world. One of the journal was circling around, and we have pictures of a lot of dicks with the guns, because they do love their hunting. Iosif Broz Tito, in fact, we put two of them together because he was hunting in a form that, because he was Austro-Hungarian, he lived in Austro-Hungary before, so he was very well dressed as a noble Austro-Hungarian, and then he was hunting with Nikita Khrushchev, so he was dressed like a peasant. But nonetheless, it really stands behind it. And in the journal that I was talking about, so they do have this kind of macho power. I was just in Sardinia, where I was trying to chase Berlusconi, hoping Putin would be there as well, unfortunately in vain. However, what I learned there, that both Mussolini and Berlusconi Berlusconi were called the phallus in chief. Apparently, the very clever Italians called them both the phallus in chief. So yes, you can say it's either out of insecurity. Another thing that I've discovered very quickly, that most of our dicks are either below 5'8" or above 6 feet tall. So when you're a regular man, not that it's, I mean, very short men do not have to be dicks, they can be wonderful, but sometimes there's something happens to some men. So it's either below 5'8" or above 6 feet tall.
I get it.
Because when you're born at 6'4", like Idi Amin, you just have to be it.
Nina, I got to answer this sex question, because of course, some of the dictators are not included. The one that fascinates me is the Sultan of Brunei and his family, because they have a harem and their sons are actually enjoying women. They actually commission an American artist to make bronze sculptures of having sex and actually being placed in the garden of their palace. So
in real sort of, it's
so
very real people.
The question is, of course, why is it not gold? Why?
Right, that's my question. It should be
why is
not
it bronze?
So let me just thank you. Let me just very quickly announce, as we promised. I think there's a graphic for that. So most people, most leaders who got the votes, 223, are the 3 Kims of North Korea. Appropriate. Okay. The second person, you will be amazed or maybe not, is President Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey. He got 505 votes. 205 votes. Then we get Mao Zedong, the chairman of China, the chairman of Communist Party of China, 35 votes. Vladimir Putin is 24. Dick Cheney, to my great disappointment, got only 6.
That was just you voting.
Yeah. No, I was actually an equal opportunity. I did vote every day, but I was diversifying my dicks. And then Fidel Castro got 8. And other dicks that we're going to post on Facebook and Twitter and, sort of explain who they are, other dicks got 32 votes. Indira Gandhi is one of them. Thank you very much. Thank you, my colleagues. Thank you, Bobby Ghosh. And please come, enjoy the snacks. We have dick wine. Please enjoy the exhibit. Thank you.
Which one?